Hey, welcome to the Evangelical Dark Web. It looks like we are live on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. This would be our first YouTube live stream since the unforeseen and unfortunate events during the annual Southern Baptist Convention of 2022, in which the Evangelical Dark Web was nuked for rather bogus content violations. So this is our first stream. We are back, and we will be doing a follow-up of a previous stream that we did on Christ or Chaos. And part of the impetus for that stream was the acceptance of Dave Rubin's fatherhood and procuring babies in order to be a father. That was part of the impetus for that last stream. We're going to be doing a follow-up in this stream. In this stream, we're going to be focusing primarily more on Jordan Peterson, but we're going to start off a few different areas. So I got Anthony here. He wrote the article and I edited the title. So the condemning or on the idolatry of Jordan Peterson. So he's the author of that article, and we have him to join us tonight. He was with us the last time we did a Christ or Chaos stream, so it is good to have him back. How are you doing today?
Yeah, long day. Tired, But this article actually did take me probably the better part of a week. I probably edited it like 100 times. The last adjustment I put in there was about the 4 different issues and just like on 3 of the 4. So that line was one of the last edits that I threw in there. I think I put one like the pragmatist line in there, but overall, I mean, this Peterson might be the second example of this happening this year, but the whole voluntary martyrdom on Twitter, where
Right.
someone steps on a landmine, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and then other people are just like, I'm going to step on that same landmine too. You saw that after the Babylon Bee, like that was the first
But
time.
apparently you can say Kyle Rittenhouse did nothing wrong on Twitter. So apparently you can say that now. And we're going to be talking about Twitter shortly. That'll be our first subject of this evening. But this
I
is a live edition of Evangelical Dark Web. So don't forget to send your live chat in. We love live chat here because I love the comment sections. I live for comment sections. That's the entire purpose of social media, is the comment section. But in this case, it's a live comment section. And also, don't forget to support Evangelical Dark Web over at evangelicaldarkweb.org/join. That is a way to support us monetarily. That is another way to do it, and this is completely free, is the daily newsletter and the RSS feed. So otherwise, let's talk issue 1, owning Twitter or owning Twitter. And definitely a bit of a Breaking Bad reference here with the criminal lawyer or a criminal lawyer. So this is about Elon Musk backing out of the Twitter deal. You had some words on Gab that you posted about this. So why don't you kind of share your thoughts about what's going on? I've seen some other
um
people saying the same thing.
yeah, I mean, there's 2 ways to look at it. Like I've seen some people saying it's just a negotiation tactic, which at the end of the day it might be, but I mean, ever since he, announced the deal, I feel like Musk has been looking for an objection. Like, I did car sales for 3 years, so when a customer is always going to look for an objection, even after they've said yes, even as they're further along in the yes train. Like they might agree to the price, and then they're not agreeing to the trade, so they're kind of looking for an objection to justify escaping the deal because they're possibly scared of the commitment. Obviously, $44 billion, that's not a small chunk of change, even for a guy like Musk. And when he signs the paperwork, I guess the final paperwork, he has to have all that cash available because, you're turning that cash in to the company. The company then, you know, is fully in your
Right.
possession.
He's not buying with stock. This isn't a stock
It
purchase.
could be a
This is a
leverage.
cash
It could be a
purchase.
leverage buyout or something along the, or he has like maybe other investors on the side. It could be a situation where his Saudi friends that didn't buy Tesla for him might be saying, "Hey, we don't like a lot of these metrics happening on Twitter." But I do feel like he has kind of been waffling a little bit and kind of looking for the objection.
So one of the sentiments that I'm hearing is that Elon Musk bought Twitter for its value in politics and debate. So what does it matter how many bots are on Twitter? You still have 91 million active users.
Yeah, that's what I kind of was just like, okay, yeah, you have a billion, like 1.2 billion uh, accounts, and I think you subtracted from that the brands, so that's various brand accounts. I think were actually subtracted. So
But
when you
even that
arrive at
was like
the
that wasn't that many.
yeah, but
The biggest was the bots or inactive accounts.
even still, I mean, monthly active users, that's your standard I guess metric for activity on a social media platform that everyone reports a monthly active user count. 93 million um, monthly active viewers with 70,000 like blue checks. I think that was just domestic. So I mean that's what you're paying for. You're paying for that. You're not paying for who cares if the bots are there. I mean 93 million people that users, that's what you're paying for. And that those 93 million and especially those 70,000 blue checks, those drive the political discourse in America at a disproportionate percentage. So that's what you're buying when you're buying Twitter. And I just think he was kind of looking for the objection because if you can say, "Oh, all these bots, I'm out," and you know, now I guess the fight might be whether he has to pay the breakup fee or not, because I think Twitter's going to try to make him honor the deal, which could either be him, pursuing the purchase or him honoring the breakup agreement.
Now another thing is I'm hearing kind of this conflicting reports about whether he waived due diligence on this deal entirely or not, which would make a lot of the bot claims kind of pointless. But it seems like that Twitter was willing to negotiate down in price because because of Elon Musk's objection to the user base and user numbers kind of being fraudulent or a lot lower than purported. So, but anyway, we're talking about Elon Musk as well as Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin simply because Elon Musk is viewed as a secular messianic figure to some degree in our society. I don't think, as far as rich people goes, Elon Musk is probably the most prevalent and perhaps the most popular rich man in the United States. I don't really think there's any question of that. And he's kind of a man of the people, so to speak. It's sort of like Donald Trump, except has a lot more money than Donald Trump ever did. And Elon Musk is doing the man of the people thing. And for him to back out of this Twitter deal, kind of, in my opinion, in some way, shape, or form, this threatens his reputation as a man of the people.
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible. I mean, I'm not going to pretend Musk has had the most ethical run in corporations. I mean, again, going back to the funding secured, he kind of does have a lot of one might call mercurial or very inconsistent. He'll say something off the cuff and then have. I mean, he was almost Trumpian in that sense. So
Right. And, he's rich. He could have gotten bored with the deal, or he, could be more just LARPing. He just wants to own Twitter rather than own Twitter. So that is issue one. So issue two is Dave Rubin a conservative hero?
I mean, to people like Daily Wire, sure, but like at the end of
You gotta see this clip. So I'm gonna play a clip for you. And this
when I see this now, suddenly, like, when we announced that we were having kids, there was some pushback online from more religious people on the right. By the way, 99% of it was all anonymous people. It was virtually nobody certainly nobody that I knew. There were one or two people that had blue checks on Twitter, but it was all these people, talking about the sanctity of marriage and all of these things. But I'm sympathetic to conservatives who go, boy, we let gay marriage happen, and look what's happened since. Now we're into all this gender stuff, and they're literally teaching gender theory to 5-year-olds who know nothing about gender or sex or anything else. I see it. I see what they were worried about, and unfortunately, the left. You tweeted out something a couple of weeks ago. I was never a conservative until the liberals decided there were no rules. I'm paraphrasing you roughly. But I'm sympathetic to that. So much of all of the things that we knew, we no longer know at a societal level, apparently. So what do we do going back to the conservatives that were worried that this is where we were going to end up? In some sense, I should probably be their greatest hero, because it's like, oh, here's someone who wanted to enter civilized society, wanted to affirm most of the long-fought, time-tested ideals, wanted to enter the world with those things, help defend that world. It happens to be a little different than we would think, right? Yeah. Okay, it's two guys. I can't deny it. I should sort of be a hero to them. It's not the ideal one that they went for, but it's approximately close enough that this should be pretty good. I suppose that will be my challenge in life.
Well, I think, but I also think that's probably true. But you also said earlier that as far as you're concerned, they also have a point.
There is a point there.
Okay, so what's the point?
Well, there has to be a point there because, look, gay marriage was legalized, I think, at a federal level in the United States in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. So that we're now 7 years off of that. Right. And look at all of the craziness that has happened since. I am not directly connecting it to that. But when you change fundamental structures, some weird things are going to happen. This is, again, where I would lay most of the blame here. I would lay on the sort of liberal establishment where nobody was willing to defend anything.
Yikes.
Well, I noticed the one line, he said that before, the whole 98% of people didn't push back on it. Like he said that, I think he said that on his own show, or I know that was
didn't push back on gay marriage.
No, the 98% gave him positive feedback. It was like the alt-right people that didn't.
And that's just completely asinine, because we know multiple people at the Blaze who did not approve. It's lying to say that only the anonymous opposed him. Like, he's absolutely lying. And the ego on that guy, like, that was egotistical as it gets. They should view me as a hero. I'm sort of a hero to them because I'm the good gay. That's basically his entire point, is that he's a hero because he's not as bad as the left.
Yeah, I mean, he did. I like the whole, horseshoes and hand grenades. I'm close enough to approximating the ideal instead of saying we should strive for the ideal, which again, he's more or less rejecting the ideal. Using his acquired wealth to achieve it. Because again, surrogacy is not cheap. The whole,
he had double surrogacy, so it's doubly not cheap. Because he did the same exact thing that we made fun of Pete Buttigieg for doing. Our Secretary of Transportation, who does not make the shipping lanes run on time. So he did the exact same thing. And we already did a stream on this, but it's just interesting to bring up Dave Rubin in tandem with Jordan Peterson because of that video that they did. And I thought Doug Wilson did an excellent commentary on like a 15-minute segment or so. It was a 15-minute video, so obviously he didn't do a 15-minute segment, but he did a pretty decent commentary on the issue. You would probably say that he was too charitable towards Jordan Peterson and perhaps Dave Rubin as well. You did say that.
He's done that multiple times on Wilson. Other than that, his commentary was pretty on the spot. I praised him.
Yeah, especially when it talked about the ideal versus, like, there is an ideal and that they are rejecting the ideal.
And I liked how Wilson was just like, sin is just missing the mark. So, it's okay to miss the mark as long as you're approximately close.
Right. So there's a very antinomian attitude about the idea. And let's just level. Every falling short is equal. And that's just not a biblical notion. The Bible doesn't directly lay out a hierarchy of sin. But obviously we have the unforgivable sin, which is blaspheming the Holy Spirit. That is an unforgivable sin. And then we have obviously sins for which there are earthly remedies prescribed, like murder receives capital punishment.
Oh,
Therefore, we can assume that murder actually has a higher weight, is a greater offense than something a little bit more benign.
well, even the
Or
Ten Commandments
not
themselves
benign, but
have
yeah.
a
Yes,
have
the
a
10
hierarchy.
Commandments have a hierarchy.
Coveting is the last one, but coveting often might predate or be prerequisite to the murder, the stealing, and the lying. So the coveting is kind of the last one, but it is kind of an undergirding. So that's like generally the first sin that might happen, and then you move to stealing. You covet, so therefore you steal. So that's kind of how it would work. Maybe you had adultery again, David with his adultery, then it escalated
Because
to
it's
murder.
murder, adultery, theft, bearing false witness, then coveting. Hello? So don't forget to send in chat if you have chat. We love chat. So it's just kind of interesting. We have a rejection of the ideal. We have obviously the age-old question of what is conservatism trying to conserve. And I think Dave Rubin just has a massive ego to not only pretend like the opposition to what he's doing is anonymous Twitter accounts, but also to then say that he's a hero because he's trying. I don't, because he's not as bad as, say, I'm trying to think of like a very gay leftist here. He's not as bad as Pete Buttigieg. Like, is that his point?
I mean, I feel like he's trying to say that he's also kind of saying there's no valid moral objection to what he's doing. So I think he's trying to, again, obviously, he doesn't accept Christ, but he is kind of rejecting the notion that there's a valid religious objection to his activities, or he thinks he's the fulfillment of said religious virtues, kind of like a Spencer Clavin, who thinks he's the fulfillment of Scripture's role, just with one, tiny little alteration that isn't so tiny. So I think there's kind of maybe both of those angles working, where he views there being no valid objection to his behavior, as well as he thinks he's fulfilling the behavior or fulfilling the virtues that he is obviously in violation of, but he doesn't see it that way.
No, and this is just kind of the pitfall of trying to rely on secular figures to carry a movement, and conservatism does not thrive without Christ. Look anywhere else in the world. Can you name a single country that has a thriving conservative movement? You really can't. When you look at, and I might do a quick little snappy article about Brent Leatherwood commenting on British politics, because as many of you know, Boris Johnson just resigned last week from being Prime Minister of England or Britain. So he has 8 people vying to replace him in an inter-party playoff, so to speak. They have to do their own inter-party election. And of those 8, finding a candidate that is not only pro-Brexit, which is kind of shocking because Boris Johnson...
That was his election mandate, was the Brexit.
Yes, that Brexit. So finding a candidate that's pro-Brexit is hard enough. Finding a president or a candidate that is against vaccine passports is hard enough. And then there's like Zero Net. I don't quite know what that is. I don't know whether it's an immigration hawking or what. But finding a candidate that's remotely right wing and to replace Boris Johnson's impossible. They don't have a right-wing candidate to replace Boris Johnson. But yeah, conservatism can totally work without Christianity. And that's the problem that you see in Canada. That's the problem that you see in the UK. And you cannot have a conservative movement without Christianity. And people like Dave Rubin are going to lead us down the path of Canada, where you have 5 left-wing parties vying for power. They're going to lead us down the path of the UK, where even the most dominant party, which is the Tories, are completely left-wing. And there's not really a right-wing say in that party. So I don't get the idea that we need not only highly secular, but openly defiant of Christian principles people in the movement. That's not going to work.
I think a lot of it just comes down to they want the movement to reflect who they are. So they want a movement that reflects what they believe. And obviously, I've mentioned before that conservative media and a lot of people, and obviously your politicians and your media pundits are disproportionately to the left of their audience and their voters. So your average Republican in Congress is to the left of the voters. Same thing with your average pundit. Insert pundit here. They're all to the left. They're all more socially liberal than their constituency. So, and it's no different. So, therefore, those people want the party and the movement to look like them.
I mean, that's what Dave Rubin reminded me was a rhino politician I met, who, first thing he's talking about is, big shoes to fill and stuff like that, as if he's such this big guy. That he's such an important figure that he needs to be replaced with only the best. And it's like he was a turd, and then he supports gun control as a Republican. So this is a pretty interesting comment by Carl. Britain doesn't have a government that respects liberty and private property and the ability to defend both with firearms if necessary. And that's completely accurate. They don't have that. They don't have a right wing in politics. So it doesn't work. And again, the reason why they don't have a right wing in politics is because they're an extremely secular culture. The Church of England announced this week they don't know what a woman is. I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah, I think I saw that.
And then now in other American news, the Episcopalian denomination determined that they didn't know they weren't going to move their next year's convention to somewhere else, but I think that had more to do with the fact that they were waiting to see how the courts would play out in Kentucky's abortion ban. So
there's more going on than just we want to move it because Kentucky bad.
So T says Peterson is some sort of agnostic. Rubin is Jewish. What can one expect from these two? And that's kind of what we're asking and answering hopefully tonight on this live stream. And that's the conversation we're trying to have, is like, what can we, Christ or chaos? This is basically round 2 of this question, Christ or chaos. And Elon Musk is also, I would throw Elon Musk in the same category because, this is someone who's openly not a Christian as well, who openly thinks that helping women climb the corporate ladder also means making them a baby mama, apparently.
Hey, look, cut him some slack. He's like the only big tech billionaire that isn't a pro depopulation.
Yes. I'm very glad that Elon Musk does not believe in the Bill Gates depopulation agenda. So I'm very glad to hear about that. But at the same time, Tesla is also funding people's trips
abortion travel.
For abortion leave. So how much of a hero is Elon Musk? And I get that he likes Ron DeSantis, because who doesn't? Because Ron DeSantis has a masculine edge to him because he actually does what he says he's going to do, which kind of makes him more likable to dudes than, say, Donald Trump. Donald Trump, very likable to dudes.
No, I mean, go to
Ron DeSantis brings it. He brings it a little harder.
Go to show you don't need to compromise to effectuate change, and the fact that you do what you enact your agenda basically mean, obviously more wins on the board, more momentum, people fall in line. But the other thing is, when we talk about making the people in the center choose the lesser of two evils, they'll choose right. They'll back the supposed.
Yes. I mean, unless they have an entire worldview centered around with what they like to do with their PP, i.e. they want abortion on demand, or who knows, maybe, again, identity politics of homosexuality, Dave Rubin. Because, again, Dave Rubin basically left the left when gays were no longer the number one victim group status in the Democrat Party. Changed my mind. That's the real correlation with why he left the left. It has nothing to do with ideology. It has nothing to do with the rise of transgenderism, because the Democrat Party platform embraced transgenderism in 2012, which would have been like 5 years before Dave Rubin left the left. So what exactly is the issue? And I think it has more to do with they want to be, a lot of people who come over from the left want to be the victim status group on the right. They have not forsaken their identity politics and their desire for identity politics. Carl has another comment here. Elon came to the United States and reaped the benefits of all the U.S. had to offer, so he will defend it, which includes freedom of religion. Bible has examples of God using non-believers to forward the kingdom. I think that's true, and that's also true of Donald Trump. The problem is when you're making Elon Musk to be about someone who can save a culture more than he actually can. And that's what people are doing all the time. Like Elon Musk buying Twitter wasn't going to save the culture. It could have had a major impact. But a lot of people hailed him as some sort of cultural savior or someone who could otherwise turn America around from the private sector. So far, we're not really seeing that. I mean, yes, SpaceX has expanded the imagination of science and stuff like that, but again, we haven't had anything transcendent or earth-shattering, to use a space pun, from SpaceX yet. And then Tesla has created a great brand of electric cars in which everyone who's tried to copy Tesla is apparently, I don't know if you've heard about like these companies that are making electric vehicles like Toyota and Chevy have like major fundamental issues. Like Toyota's wheels are falling off trying to make electric vehicles. But
I
then
think I heard something about like the Ford F-150
yeah,
could barely tow a boat, or
yeah,
couldn't tow it that far.
so, and again, I think electric vehicles are actually a pretty bad idea. They are a dead end technology because we're going to run out of lithium before we run out of oil, and then just the environmental damage of harvesting lithium. They are not a green technology, despite what they might, despite how much they're lobbying for it. So I don't, from his own business perspective, I don't see Elon Musk as necessarily a force for good, although he has been into the whole transhumanism thing in terms of putting robotics and stuff like that into people's bodies. He's been a big fan. He's been a fan of that idea for a long time. I don't know where he still stands on that, but Carl makes a great point that Elon Musk does believe in freedom of speech. He does believe in freedom of religion. He does believe in these things. He at least believes in the United States. But I don't think he has the worldview to offer long-term constructive solutions.
Oh, that's why he's probably backing. That's why he kind of leans towards like a Ron DeSantis type versus someone that's probably more in his own political wheelhouse, which I guess would be like a Mitt Romney, a Joe Manchin. I'm trying to think who would actually be a Elon Musk type politician, but it would probably be someone in that field. I mean, obviously, there's been a couple billionaires that have ran on the Democrat side, so maybe someone closer to them.
So why wasn't Donald Trump big for Elon Musk? Because I don't think Elon Musk and Donald Trump got along. I think Donald Trump is pretty much mocking Elon Musk, kind of calling him like a scammer for the whole Twitter buyout thing.
Well, I mean, for starters, Musk buying Twitter destroyed any chance of Truth Social taking off, or destroyed what
did.
was left of Truth Social's takeoff. So the runway for Truth Social was immediately just gone. The earthquake took it, and that was it for.
I was worried that Elon Musk buying Truth Social would threaten Gab, but obviously I think Gab has survived. Gab has also expanded. Like they've opened a shop since. They've opened their YouTube type platform. I think it's more closer to Vimeo, but they opened their video platform to everyone else. So Gab's expanding, and now Gab Pay accepts MasterCard and Visa, the two largest credit cards processors in the world. So I thought Gab was going to be threatened by them. And Andrew Torba has been skeptical of Elon Musk doing it the entire time, as has Donald Trump. But I wasn't sure whether to largely view this through the lens of they are competing interest. So you can't you got to take that with a grain of salt. I want to recognize and thank Phil for the super chat. I appreciate the work you guys are doing. Keep it up. Now, again, Anthony wrote the article on Jordan Peterson that we're about to jump into, not me. So, I don't write everything at Evangelical Dark Web. So don't give me all the credit. But this one came from him. I do all the videos. So we're going to dive into that article on not Elon Musk, on Jordan Peterson. So where exactly you want to begin with that? Because obviously you call it idolatry.
Yeah, I mean, he became like the right-wing news cycle for nearly a week over a tweet on the whole Ellen Page thing. That was basically a year-old issue. And I think maybe the relevance might be like Umbrella Academy or something, which doesn't really matter because the only Netflix show people are talking about is Stranger Things, which blows, by the way. Spoiler alert. But
that's an unpopular opinion, but we'll allow it.
But
it's funny. It's funny because, again, I did a video on Ellen Page back when that was a real issue.
Yeah, I think yours was dated March 29th or March 31st or May 31st of 21, which is why I'm just
it was all the way back in May of 2021 when this was an
late
issue.
May.
Yeah,
So this was a very it's kind of like, let's just come out and say something like after the lines have been drawn, the wind's blowing, you know where the directions are, so you just make a comment
And the thing about that video that I did on Ellen Page is that video is still getting a lot of views. It is not it caught the search engine algorithm, a very niche search, but it still gets views. And the thing is, I said what I said. I was somewhat mocking, but also somewhat recognizing that this is a very tragic case because Ellen Page was very talented.
Yeah,
and it's funny because if you look at one of the most pro-life movies that was ever made was Juno.
Yes.
That is one of the most pro-life movies that's ever been made. And she was the star of that, and she did a phenomenal job in that. That is one of the best female comedy acting performances I've ever seen. And she just pissed it away going on the woke cultish mindset. And I don't think that enough people realize, even Christians, they just think that this is a mental thing. This is more of a spiritual thing. And this is a cult that she's been swallowed up by. And that cult just cost her an acting career. Because if you look at her acting career going forward, in competing for male leads, who are you going to hire? Are you going to hire Ellen Page as Elliot Page, or are you going to hire Michael Cera? And I choose that because of Juno. They were both the stars of Juno. It's like Michael Cera, who still looks like Michael Cera. Or
well, I mean, if a lot of these characters want to hire, like, how they only want to hire the paraplegic to play, wheelchair-bound individuals, kind of like that situation, and a disproportionate amount of characters on a TV show now are going to be alphabet, so that might provide a disproportionate amount of roles.
And I'm pretty sure, as far as proportions go, Hispanics are the most screwed.
Unless it's like
they are the most underrepresented. Yeah, unless it's like a Breaking Bad, but Hispanics are probably the most underrepresented in film. Blacks are probably the most overrepresented in film. So that probably is the case. But along the lines of, you talked about Jordan Peterson committing martyrdom, social media martyrdom, or Twitter martyrdom, you say. Where exactly, why is that a big deal?
I mean, the idea that it's capturing like right-wing attention for an entire week over something that's very, benign. I mean, keep in mind, if you look at the last week, I mean, we've had revolts in
yes,
Netherlands. You've had
okay. I don't know if you read the article that I published this morning, but the insurrection in Sri Lanka just threatens democracy everywhere. Like, democracy is completely threatened by the insurrectionist who stormed the presidential mansion in Sri Lanka. And that is just a threat to democracy everywhere. And Big Eva has just been so silent on that issue. But yeah, you're right. Instability everywhere. And then, of course, you didn't mention the Japanese prime minister being assassinated, former prime minister being assassinated.
Was maybe towards the tail end. because I think that was a Friday.
So
Well,
instability is everywhere, and yet Jordan Peterson
mean-
being Twitter banned is a huge deal.
so I mean that kind of just, and again, Twitter banned for like a very banal talking point that's very late to the party. And again, it's not even the first instance of this. Daily Wire. I mean, again, a lot of it has to do with Daily Wire and their place in conservative media as basically just the next Fox News, maybe slightly to the right, but with a younger audience. So they
I
want to
mean,
platform their people every time they fart, it makes news, and that's just kind of a
and let's
ridiculous
talk
model.
about that younger audience, because I think that's key for diagnosing why Jordan Peterson is as prominent as he is, why a lot of these secular figures, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, Elon Musk,
I also
the
name
three in the title, and then Joe Rogan. I have an ancillary question about Joe Rogan after we're done talking about Jordan Peterson lined up, and maybe Dave Portnoy as well. And the point about the young audience was the point that I was going on after. And Washington Examiner reported, and I believe this was a civics poll, 69% of people aged 18 to 29, so our age group, 69% disapproval rating for Joe Biden's performance.
It's only 69%, which means
Well, that's pretty nice, right? But 1% strongly approve of Joe Biden within that same age group.
And which was that the latest?
That was a civics poll that came out earlier this week. I saw the headlines for that last night or the night before. And you know what the over 65 was? 54% disapproval.
Okay, so 14 point.
So the younger demographic has a 14-point higher disapproval rating of Joe Biden than the oldest demographic. That's insane. But it shows that there's a future for right-wing politics in the United States if we can capitalize on that, if we can kind of onboard. Not everyone needs to be as base as Ron DeSantis coming out of the gate, but we can't let the Mitt Romneys capture the movement, if you know what I'm saying. Like, we got to onboard them. And I think Daily Wire does a lot of good things on the onboarding people. Like What's a Woman is a very good onboarding outreach type of documentary. So there's a lot of people going for this dissatisfied demographic that will soon have that they're in the money. Like 18 to 34 is like or is it 18 to 40 is the prime advertising market. Yeah. So, and this prime advertising market is very anti-Joe Biden.
Oh, I mean, they're at the bottom of the totem pole getting screwed by,
everything.
Their, whatever savings they have might be, in the toilet. They can't afford houses. Oh, they're trying to buy a house, 6% interest rate. Congratulations. Oh, the gas price is going down. Well, that's because there's a recession around the corner. So, lower gas prices. Yay. Recession. Yep.
Yeah, because gas is a speculative market. So gas prices are dependent on, I believe, future supply and demand, not current.
Yeah.
And so they're anticipating a drop in demand. Additionally, I believe the EPA, the ruling against the EPA by the Supreme Court, I believe that was like the last based ruling from the Supreme Court term, just completely eviscerated the EPA and also helped lower gas prices in the process as well. But
I don't think the student loan thing is as big of a driver behind these numbers, because I know a lot of people will try to say like they just want their loans paid off, and Biden wants to pay their loans off, and that'll assuage the younger crowd, but I don't buy it.
Carl says just can't let the younger people get burned.
Yeah,
because that's the alternative.
And a lot of those that would probably be the ones that do postgraduate level education, because that's where the bulk of the student debt comes from. Is a lot of these upper middle class background individuals, they pursue doctorates to grad school, all that. That's where the student loan comes from, because otherwise the average is 28 grand, which is basically a car payment.
It's pretty manageable.
It's a car loan. And
Yeah,
maybe $500 a month at 60. I mean,
so, Christ or chaos, we have to offer a positive reinforcement. I think Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, Elon Musk, they offer chaos. They don't offer chaos with the worst intentions. Like, I don't think they have the worst intentions, but they don't bring order. And their ideas put together won't bring order. They won't restore a sense of lawfulness in our society. We instead have lawlessness. And the lawlessness is we don't know what a constitution is. And I mean, if you just look how much of the Constitution's been struck by the Supreme Court over the several years, and then we did just have a good term, and hopefully, again, the overturn of Roe v. Wade really sets a cultural change in our society, and I think it will. It'll take some time. It'll take more time than, say, going back to that clip from earlier that I showed of Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin, where Dave Rubin was acting like there wasn't a connection between the 2015 Obergefell ruling and the gender madness that followed.
And
he wants to act like there's not a connection there. No, there's a direct line.
Said that there was a connection?
Who?
Antonin Scalia, when he wrote the dissenting opinion to Lawrence versus Texas in 2003, he basically said that if you allow legalized sodomy, you will eventually get gay marriage, prostitution, I guess group sex, like all these things would eventually happen. If he might not have even had the tranny thing, but he had like all the other things. And again, we haven't seen all of them legalized.
We've seen OnlyFans.
Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of this stuff legalized by the state, so to speak, but we have seen it kind of.
Yeah. Okay.
Going
so, Thomas,
parallel.
We talked about Doug Wilson's reaction to it, and he gave a pretty good reaction to it. I don't know if he did a whole reaction to the whole thing, but he posted like a 15-minute video that we thought was pretty good. And then is the Swamp's support for DeSantis 24, like Meghan McCain and the like, a warning sign? And yes. But
yes, and no,
yes, but it's not conclusive, I guess, is the answer that I would give.
Well, I've seen this because I know like even like Andrew Torba's kind of throwing this out, which I disagree. I mean, look at Ron DeSantis's funding. He has over $150 million in funding for a governor's race. He doesn't need half of that money to win his reelection campaign. Like he won with 56 million, I think. And even a very aggressive, like a record-setting aggressive gubernatorial election is still probably a little bit under $100 million to win a race. So the fact that he has pretty much double the amount he would need means
I think he won with like $80 million or $70 million last time. So that was a very high budget race.
It was one
of the only races in the country where the Republicans outspent the Democrats in a high profile race. Was both the Florida governors and the Florida Senate race. The Republicans outspent the Democrats
twice the amount he needs, and there's still plenty of runway before even their own primary in Florida, as well as, of course, the lead.
Now, where I would push back on this is when it was Trump versus Cruz, a lot of establishment types went to Cruz. Now they hate Cruz. They still hate Cruz, but they hate Trump that much more. So I think they might be going in that direction because of personality, not because of policy. Because these people they don't care about policy. Do you think Meghan McCain cares about policy? No. She's her father's daughter.
Well, keep in mind, anytime someone has momentum, you're always going to have someone come in and try to get in on the ground floor. It's basically like, Ron DeSantis has a winning lottery ticket. Again, he has practically $100 million more than he needs to win his reelection campaign. So that excess money's got to go somewhere. And, you got a winning lottery ticket. People want to join you. People will come to you. They'll come out of the woodworks to support you.
So Andrew Sullivan got his answer from 8 years ago. Tell me why the gay marriage will be bad for society. Now he's fighting the transport issues, longing for the good old days of just being gay. And yeah, you cannot put that genie back in the bottle. And guess what? Before gay marriage happened, the homosexuality already tied its wagon to transgenderism. It was already the sidecar on the motorcycle, and you can't undo that. It was probably beyond that. Like, this is
I mean,
LGBT was 4 tires on a wheel. You can't just take them off the car, or 4 tires on a car. You can't take that off.
I mean, it all goes back to feminism being kind of the underlying
Oh,
ideology.
yes.
So you have, feminism, which basically would advocate, like, again, your second wave feminists advocated for a consent-based sexual morality system, which now even the consent part is retroactive. And of course, consent means any 2 people or more than 2 people. So that gets you
And
the gay thing.
yes.
And then they all, those same people also broke down what is a woman, what does it mean to be a woman. They kind of disconnected the whole motherhood part, that uterus and those ovaries. They disconnected that part from what it means to be a woman. So a lot of the ideology that undergirds, this entire movement was basically just feminism.
Right. And Josh Hawley, I believe, got lectured in Congress today for not being inclusive with regards to pregnant women. So I think drawing a straight line from gay marriage to gender is actually a pretty good place to pick up with Jordan Peterson and pronouns. Now, you've kind of talked a lot about how his position on this is actually considerably weak and compromised.
And again, when it goes back to Peterson will only lead to chaos, because again, he kind of functions as like a pragmatist who wants to like find the middle ground, which is generally somewhere along the slippery slope. But he's just ice picking it somewhere up the slippery slope, and just
Now,
kind
is it slippery slope in the same, or is his compromise in the same way with thesis, antithesis, synthesis?
I mean, you could say it's a Hegelian dialectic, or even like a third wayism, because again, that's how you arrive at this, is because you're playing the Hegelian dialectic. I mean, 50 years ago, no one would have even talked about the whole pronoun thing or the gay marriage thing. You arrived at that by playing the Hegelian dialectic or third wayism and all these intellectual mind games. That's how you arrive at these situations. But yeah, I mean, his entire claim to fame was kind of objecting to the what's called C-116, which would have made the whole preferred pronouns thing compulsory by the state. But his stance was not that he objected to it because it was like dishonest and lying to the individuals. He objected just to the compelled speech, but he would have complied to the compelled speech if asked. So if a student addressed him to do and asked or requested that he do something, he would have done it. So it goes back to the whole capitulation leads to compulsion, and we've seen this 1,000 times. That's why we had jab mandates, because 78% of Americans have at least one jab. 66% are double jabbed or fully jabbed, and then
Well, they'll
around
never
40%
be fully jabbed.
according to the official numbers, they're considered full. And then you have 40 that are boosted. So when you have people that capitulate voluntarily, then you eventually lead to, compulsion. And especially on the gender thing, these people are lying, and of course, the whole thing about a lie is that a deception will try to be recognized as truth. That's why people deceive. That's why people lie, is because they want to lie the information they
Right.
want to be viewed as truth. So
It's not a lie if you end up believing it, right?
yeah,
So
and of
that
course,
George stands a logic.
if large enough, then you get compelled by the state to accept the lie or suffer consequences.
Right, and as far as as far as I'm aware, Jordan Peterson, as you said, would not object. Only objects to the compulsory component of anything regarding pronouns. He doesn't really object to the societal behavioral component. He might object to the biological component, but in terms of everyday transacting or conversing, you're saying that he doesn't really have a real principled stand.
And that's kind of playing the whole pragmatist approach. And again, people always will, like, even like Doug Wilson might say he's a truth seeker or data driven, the wisest man in our lifetime, which is part of why I wrote the article, because it's just like, no, he's not. He's just kind of doing his own, pragmatism would be like the generous way of saying it. He's a pragmatist. He thinks, okay, if you just do this and be nice, then there should be like enough great common grace in society. But what happens when someone says no? And then again,
right. So can his worldview withstand resistance?
well, I would say it doesn't, and that's kind of why, I mean, you have teachers. I mean, even in America, you've started seeing cases come up of the whole pronoun thing. I think they even charged some students. Like, students were actually arrested
I don't think
somewhere.
that was in Maryland. I thought that was Michigan or Wisconsin, but yes.
So I mean,
And they won. I think they won.
But the whole compulsion, like when you submit to something, you are the reason it becomes compelled later on. And
Yes.
he doesn't have that. He doesn't make that connection, and that's again, that would be a huge weakness.
So when you talk about him being a pragmatist, the number one name that comes to mind is Rick Warren. Rick Warren is the Mac Daddy of pragmatism in the church, and he's also huge into self-help. So I draw a comparison, and obviously you talk about 12 rules for life and then beyond 12 rules for life, or whatever it's called, the sequel. What exactly, and you would kind of call it self-help and self-help for men. So is Jordan Peterson more of a modern day Rick Warren?
I mean, I imagine he's probably on the maybe a slightly better version of a Rick Warren, because
I mean, Rick Warren is so pragmatic and so likable that he got to moderate a debate between John McCain and Barack Obama.
and he's inaugurated 2 presidents, I think.
So is he really a better version of Rick Warren, or is he just
Probably
the
a
next
more intellectual
for a different generation?
Yeah, probably appeals more on an intellectual ground, and I would certainly say he appeals to a younger, probably more masculine demographic than a Rick Warren. I imagine Rick Warren's. I mean, obviously, if you're moderating presidential debates, it's probably because you appeal to an older demographic. So that would probably be more in line with Rick Warren. Plus, his whole shtick was make the contemporary church experience, which would have been like the contemporary church experience starting like 20, 30 years ago. So I mean, his demographic would probably be more Gen X than Boomer. Peterson would probably be more millennial and Gen Z.
Right. So, but going through self-help for men, what any of the 12 rules really just stick out to you?
I mean, it's not even that all these things are bad, and I'm sure he has like excellent writing style, excellent prose, and like uses illustrations. I mean, a lot of them I kind of just say, okay, this is kind of what you would expect from any sort of like motivational content, like improving posture. That's going to be something you'd find in probably anything within the genre. Like one of them is accept that inequalities, disparities exist.
That's a little bit more political and edgy, but
well, that's the one that's categorized like don't bother children when they're skateboarding. So it's kind of like you use the something that kind of sounds a little farcical to make a profound statement out of it. So that's
I thought that had more to do with like if the process is working, don't interrupt it or whatever. I don't know. I didn't gather what you said that meant from the title of the rule. But you're right that some of these rules do have a pretty creative way to undersell it. They have a very creative way of getting the point across.
then some of the others. I mean, it's kind of stuff you again. If you were, and I do try to drive home the point that if society were more biblically literate, then you wouldn't really need a Peterson type out there, because the Bible is the
So Christ or chaos. Like, I don't think Rick Warren is Christ believing. Like, I think Rick Warren is actively a false teacher in the church. So I'm not.
I mean, keep in mind, everyone on the right that was like going off on the whole Dr. Oz thing, just remember Rick Warren was platforming Dr. Oz in the church. So to sell.
Right. So I would actually say
loss.
Rick Warren is worse than Jordan Peterson in that sense, because that's just my opinion. Like, you could
he's
probably
done.
debate.
He's planted more churches than anyone in the entire SBC.
He's trained 1 million pastors which is more than the Southern Baptist seminaries have ever done combined or whatever. So I think he's done way more. I think Rick Warren's probably done more damage than Jordan Peterson. But again, I like to look forward, not necessarily look back. And that's why we're talking about Jordan Peterson in terms of like advancing a sort of cultural pragmatism. He's not doing it within the church, but in the larger culture, he is. He totally is doing something and having sort of an influence, a very outsized influence compared to the weight of the ideas that he is offering to the table. Because again, you're talking about how he's coming in late on a lot of these settled issues.
Yeah, like
and then saying kind of a more pragmatic, tactical statement.
And I mentioned also like the tranny and sports issue. It's just like he comments on that in December of 21. In the spring of 21, that was the big issue. That was like a huge issue as far as the 24-hour news cycle. That was the issue with Kristi Noem. And then you have Ron DeSantis. Then you have all these other governors that were doing their thing. So that was the big one. I mean, like rule number 2, which is treat yourself like someone you're responsible for helping. I think I say that one is kind of like an inferior version of the second greatest commandment, which again, you say that on a lot on, I don't want to say self-help, because I read like Zig Ziglar had a similar saying, which was the best way to be happy is to make other people happy. So it's more like a sacrificial road to happiness. Now, in the context of Ziglar, that's strictly talking about, being a better salesman. That the best way to succeed in sales is to help other people be happy. So he is, I mean, it's more contextualized, but this idea that sacrificing for the sake of others leads to better fulfillment is, wonder where that's rooted ultimately. Not sure.
And I want to say that Zig Ziglar does claim to be a Christian, if I recall. So that might have more of an influence. I don't know anything about his faith otherwise. But it's just it's kind of striking. It's like at the end of the day, like, and I'm sure you remember this movie. This will kind of wrap up my point. Man, what's that movie with I think Sean William Scott or whatever, with the dude that's dating his mom, Woodcock, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Billy Bob Thornton.
Billy Bob Thornton, right, was in that movie. And then, at the end, it's kind of like a post-credit scene because the main character in that movie is a self-help author. And he was supposed to be on Oprah or something like that. And that's kind of intertwining the plot of the movie. And at the end of the movie, he like gives him a book for Christmas. And then Billy Bob Thornton's character throws it into the fire. He's like, what? And he talks about how he read it. And he's like, I like the part about, treating others the way that you wouldn't want to be treated. It's like, yeah, well, I kind of stole it from Jesus or whatever. Like, but I wrote it down. So it's like everything else was crap. It's like, it was just kind of funny. It's like, how much is that of that genre kind of relies on biblical, I don't want to say platitudes, but very biblical concepts, and then tries to build on them.
I mean, keep in mind, him, us, everyone in America is probably coming from like a world view that is somewhat at the very rooted in Christendom. Because again, Western civilizations based on Christendom and like the Roman Empire. So when you combine those two, you get Western civilization later down the road. So a lot of like the thought we have, the philosophies we have, are very much rooted in Christianity. So whether it's conscious or subconscious, that's kind of how a lot of these ideas flow through. Like I mentioned, rule number 6, I think this is the whole, make your bed and, set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. That one I kind of criticize as being probably a little bit more legalistic than like a biblical standard for like judge not, like Matthew 7, or when Jesus is talking about the whole plank in the eye thing. I think it's a little like his version, Peterson's version, would probably be more legalistic than the standard that's being imposed by Christ. Because I mean, well, one, you could argue as a Christian, your house is technically never in order because you're in sin. That's your house is not in order. That's why you require a
Right. You
savior.
can't achieve perfect perfect sinlessness before tackling other issues in the world. Like that's an impossible standard.
Or
You're
the
never
other,
going to evangelize. You're never going to fulfill the Great Commission if that's your attitude. That's obviously not an excuse to not do anything in your own life, but
But I kind of also reject the notion that you can be ready because again, I mean, I list 4 examples of where God calls on men whose houses are not in order. He doesn't wait for you to have your life together before he calls on you. Now your life might get in order as a result of him calling on you, or it might actually, end up the opposite. Your life actually falls apart because he calls on you. Now, naturally, of course, you're better off in the end, but the earthly effects are kind of where I'm going with. Like I mentioned, uh, let's see, the 4, Gideon's house had idols. He had to deal with the idolatry in his house, but he was called on by God before that. Moses' house was uncircumcised, so there's a story in the Bible about how, I guess his children were uncircumcised, and therefore he had to take it to him, and then his wife gives him, I guess, a little bit of shade at the end for having to circumcise their children, and that was after he was called. Samson's house was never in order. I hope that one kind of resonates. He never actually had his house in order. It was always kind of in shambles, always falling apart.
and the house of Dagon fell apart.
Yep. And then Abraham's was more or less asked to give up his house. So again, and of course that would be a fair statement to also say the disciples they gave up everything. They gave up their house. They gave up all the stability in their life when they followed Christ. And they actually say that to Jesus. We've given up everything to follow you.
I mean, according to the Chosen, Suns out, guns out Peter could just lull around in Capernaum for a long time for an entire season of a TV show. Which, obviously, if you've ever watched TV, you know that one season equals 1 year. So
that's how Game of Thrones works.
Yes. And that's not how source material works. But in any case, one of the things I want to drill down is why is this more effective on men than other forms of the same genre? Why is Jordan Peterson so effective at reaching out to men, particularly young men?
I imagine a lot of it is, guys are probably like the idea that it's 12 rules for life. It's, rule driven. It's structure, order. What antidote to chaos is what, is the subheading on the book. So again, you're
okay.
kind
So
of going from.
Let me bring a follow up. What about someone like Jocko Willink? I think that's how you pronounce his name. He writes a lot of the same stuff. He writes a lot of the same genre of trying to help you out, help better your life. And he has like more of a military background. He has more of a I'm working out, doing jujitsu every day type of background. What does it say go with Jordan Peterson instead of someone like that?
Oh, I mean, it's
what's the value proposition?
I don't know if there's. I think again, that's where it comes down to luck of the draw. Sometimes, like if you don't make it big, sometimes it's not a talent question. It's just you didn't make it big. I mean, there is always luck involved in becoming big, but I think a lot of. I mean, keep in mind, rules
right,
like came out. This book came out in 2018 after he was famous, so he already kind of had fame from the grandstanding, as I like to call it.
Okay, because you would call it grandstanding, I would kind of agree. Because if you're only arguing on compulsory, and not on the premise of this is incorrect or you're forcing me to break one of my 12 rules for life here, then that would fit the definition of grandstanding. But and maybe another answer to this question is the more biological component that he brings to the table, the more scientific, I should say, component that he brings to the table, because he's more or less, he's an academic.
He's going to talk about his
professor of
clinical
psychology.
experience.
So he has that to bring to the table. So I want to say that might be the answer, whereas like there's a military type of way of bringing this to the table. Like,
I imagine
I'm a Navy, if someone's a Navy SEAL and they write a self-help book, you might want to, I think a young man might want to read that, because Navy SEALs are just kind of a, except for Dan Crenshaw, is, that's kind of like peak masculinity there.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes with like war stories, it might appeal to more of an older demographic, especially if it's like World War II. But I imagine, again, there's probably more veteran self-help material. The other thing is, there's still video content. Like, I mean, if you watch the Ryan Long video on like male motivation versus female motivation, it's just like the dudes are all, what are you doing? You're still 20 pounds overweight. You better
You're
hit.
fat.
Yeah, you're fat. You're ugly. You're failing at life. What are you doing with yourself? Like, that's kind of how male motivational
Right.
speaking or
I think Thomas
happens.
is getting on us there. Men grow by being called out, broken down, and built up. Literally tough love. And that's exactly right. And I think that's why a lot of these figures rise up. And I'm going to throw Joe Rogan in this category as well, because there is something straightforward about it. It's not cushiony content, but you don't see that from the church. You largely don't see that from evangelical leaders. They cater to women. Just a flat out fact. Listen to a Levi Lusko sermon. He preaches entirely to women, for women. Another example is Mike Todd, who I might be doing a video on his views of the Trinity and how bad they are, or his teaching on the Holy Spirit. And it's like, yes. And it's very much very much designed and tailored towards women. And apparently Jason Whitlock likes him, and I don't know why, because like he's so solid on bringing biblical commentary and masculinity and cultural commentary as well. And I'm like, wait, but you like Mike Todd? This is like the opposite of what you seemingly stand for. But it's just insane, but it's.
No, I mean, I will say in the yet unpublished base manifesto, there is a line in there that you have to cultivate masculinity, and I kind of, again, I use the classical education model of mind, body, and soul, and the church has to build.
I mean, I would imagine that maybe Mark Driscoll catered more to men, with more provocative sermons,
and just his tone in general.
Right. So maybe he catered more to men, but like, can you, without someone that's disgraced, like, is there an example of a major pastor that caters to men in the same way that a Jordan Peterson or a Joe Rogan caters to men?
I mean, again, I might throw out like a Joel Webbin or like a Jeff Durbin. Those two would come to mind as far as catering to men.
I don't, maybe it's because the pastors aren't supposed to be so gender specific, but you kind of wonder, like, because you can think of a lot of pastors that are very gender specific when it comes to catering to women, but it just leaves men as this young men, particularly, as an unreached demographic. And it's kind of reminiscent of Fight Club. And obviously you're not supposed to talk about Fight Club. And, that's like rule number 1 and 2, right? But obviously everyone in that movie was breaking that rule. So we're going to have to break that rule for a second here, because that movie is literally about Gen X men.
Well,
and how purposeless they were, because they grew up without fathers because of the sexual revolution that plagued the boomer generation. That's what that movie's about. It's about men who grew up without male role models. And so Tyler Durden comes around. Durden, right? Comes around. Brad Pitt comes around. and helps Edward Norton's character figure out inner primal instincts and stuff like that. So he's directionless. Brad Pitt comes along and steers him because it's a man cannot sustain this directionlessness all his life.
Well, our tagline on feminism is that it androgenizes women and effeminizes men. So you've had
exactly
40, 50, I guess now we're nearing 60 years of feminism, more or less on the mainstream, that is effeminizing our men. Of course, testosterone counts are lower. Obviously, fertility is down. Men aren't forming relationships as much. Well, singleness is through the roof. Like when they talk about like the loss of marriage or the decline in marriage over the generations, it's primarily driven by singleness, not cohabitation. Cohabitation is more or less doubled, but that's still not the bulk of the increase in, or the decrease in marriage.
Right. So Michael Foster, I don't know if he counts as Big Eva. He's Little Eva, but yes, I know who that is. Makes a point that guys gravitate towards these conservative phenomenons because it's a call to be something that comes close to being to biblical patriarchy. They just fall short, and I think that's true. I do think that's true.
One thing I say with
I think it kind of goes the other way around.
If a pastor wants to cultivate like a more masculine or environment or appeal to men, I mean, I just, like in the base manifesto, I just say you have to, preach solid foods for solid growth. That's how you do it. You don't baby the Bible, you don't dumb it down, you tackle the hard issues. Solid foods. When Paul talks about solid foods in the church not being spiritually breastfed, I mean, he basically compares to Corinth. I mean, he goes at the Corinthians by saying that you're still being, breastfed when you should be eating solid foods. What are you doing? You gotta, solid foods for solid growth. You gotta actually talk about serious issues, serious subjects, using bigger words.
I mean, I think there's another component to this, to what Michael Foster's saying, because the opposite is extremely true. And the opposite is that women are more drawn towards liberalism. That is a fact. White college educated women are the most pro Biden demographic in terms of that's the area where Biden is growing. He is hemorrhaging on all types of racial minorities, but he is growing with white college educated women. And when you look at the issue of transgenderism, who supports that? Women do. Which is why I'm a little less sympathetic towards women's sports arguments that the right wants to make a hill to die on. It's like, no, the hill to die on is the premise of transgenderism. That's the hill to die on. Not female sports, which is a concession. That is a pragmatic compromise position. And it's the women that believe in transgenderism because don't ask me why. I think it has more to do with the fact that a guy knows that if they date a tranny, they're no longer straight. Like, that's gay. Like, I think most men understand that. And women don't have as strong of an aversion to that.
Well, I mean, again, that goes.
And they also don't have to deal with transvestite men are more common than transvestite women. So girls would just go they, them. They won't try to become a boy as often as Ellen Page, to go full circle there.
Well, the other thing, again, does go back to feminism, but the whole, it was kind of like normalized. A lot of homosexuality was normalized through women. They were kind of like the Trojan horse for normalizing it in society, the gay friend.
So I think, I see a complete, it is masculinity versus feminism. Feminism drives liberalism, whereas embracing masculinity should get you closer to conservatism and recognizing patriarchal values. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So, just want to comment while I collect my thoughts. You talk.
And that's kind of where the whole Peterson kind of falls short, especially is kind of because he might come across as grandfatherly, and that might be kind of his shtick and his appeal. But at the end of the day, he kind of is a little on the effeminate side, where again, instead of taking a hard stand for truth on the marriage thing, or on the marriage thing, on the pronouns thing, he kind of again plays the pragmatic third way Hegelian dialectic, and he just kind of sticks his ice picks in the further up the slippery slope, so he doesn't stand for the truth at the end of the day. And,
right. And
whereas a masculinity would say, no, I'm not gonna accept the premise of your delusions. Like
right.
that would be the masculine thing to do is no, I'm just going to stand by truth. I'm going to call a spade a spade.
Right. So I never thought I'd see the day where First Baptist Orlando, the church I used to attend, is baptizing openly married homosexuals. I saw that article where it was a Pastor de la Mas or whatever.
That's not the one with David, was it?
Yes, that is his church, but it wasn't him specifically that did it. I don't know whether David Youth is retiring or whatever, but that is his church. And they've made a lot of news in the last year that I've had to cover. I thought that was pretty interesting. But yes, that is what happens. They're a ghost church, but I believe they did that baptism like several months ago. Or at least the marriage happened several months ago. But I think you're right that there is. And how much of that do you think has to do with the fact that he's Canadian?
I mean, I think a lot of it does. Like honestly, Canadians are more sociable and agreeable. If you're looking at like I don't want to call it a spectrum, but when they talk about like certain nationalities have this traits, like Japanese people are more collectivist in nature. Like that's kind of Canadians don't have the same like individualism
That Americans might have.
That Americans might have. So, I mean, America's also probably a more casual place to do business because a lot of students will learn this in like business school. But I mean, that's also why I didn't say that him being Canadian is probably why he has a lot of globalist tendencies, but if the
we're all thinking it because kind of like we said at the beginning of the video, Canada is a country without a right wing. They have 5 left-wing parties vying for control. And that's why you see things like truckers rising up because they don't have a political apparatus to speak to their concerns. So they have to shut down highways and infrastructure because they don't have a political party that will represent their values, or the political party that would represent their values is entirely unelectable in that environment. So I think the Canadian part has a lot to do with it. And that's why you see a lot of these British people that try to talk conservative politics, like Douglas Murray, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
And he's completely pro-abortion and wants the pro-life and wants the conservative movement in this country to recognize abortion. It's like,
he's also
going to lose.
He's also gay as well. So it's just like, and he was doing his little grift circuit in the States, going through all the Blaze Media channels, and it's just like, okay, yeah, this guy sucks. He literally wrote an entire article saying how the pro-life movement should take a back seat on the right, and maybe if they weren't advocating values that sexual morals that were, I guess, 1950s, then
yes, the most idyllic time
grow
in U.S. history.
You would grow your numbers when, again, that's entirely false. Ask Mitt Romney, but
yes, Mitt Romney is evidence of that. That running pro-abortion ads in Virginia would not help him win that state or the election. So,
but it's like, no, the fact that the pro-life movement undergirded a good percentage of their votes. So it's like, yeah, you're forsaking voters you have for the voters you want, and the voters you want don't exist.
Without the pro-life issue, Republicans would have like 0 chance at getting the Catholic vote. But yes, go off, slay, King. Again, a lot of it has to do with these countries where they don't have an effective right wing want to lecture us on how to save a culture when they're way further down the slippery slope than we are, and they have not learned from their mistakes. And that's why you don't have a good replacement lined up for Boris Johnson. You don't have a remotely right-wing replacement for Boris Johnson. You don't have a remotely right-wing alternative for Justin Trudeau in Canada.
Well, just remember, Angela Merkel was the right-wing party, I think, in Germany.
Yes,
So
she's supposedly the right-wing party in Germany, and that's
vaccine
why
passports and lockdowns
and when it comes to like conservatism looking for, I don't want to say allies, but like people that would be identified as conservatives overseas, you get a few names that come to mind. Balansaro down in Brazil, who's again very masculine, tough guy type of dude, because he rose to power outside of the two left-wing political parties in Brazil. So that's why he's really hated on by the media. The Modi guy in India, who is apparently not as pro-vaccine as a lot of other world leaders are. Viktor Orban in Hungary, who is no friend of the man, what's his face? The guy in Zelensky. I don't know why I'm taking so long. Those two don't like each other, but Viktor Orban, who though he's kind of more dictatorial, wasn't very great on the COVID issue, but nonetheless seen as kind of more of a right-wing figure globally. So and what do the countries that I said have in common? They have some sort of spiritual element there. There's some sort of Christian component in their politic. Whereas you don't have that in France. You don't have that. You really don't have that in the United Kingdom, despite the fact that they sort of have
I
a
think they're only like
state-sponsored
10%.
church.
I think they're only like 10% evangelical or something. It's something low, which would be like a third of what it identifies in America. So
Right. So it's just kind of insane. And I think, Jordan Peterson, I do think is along one of those veins where he is a Canadian, which is why his commentary on American culture and politics is especially flaccid, because I believe he's from Toronto, Canada. So, which is not as liberal as Quebec, but still there's a bias. It's kind of like Tim Keller being in New York, and his ministry is characterized by syncretism or syncretism. I don't know why I add an extra syllable every single time I say that. Syncretism with New York City. It's all about the city. It's the city missiology is what Tim Keller was known for. And I would say he also sought that out because Tim Keller was always a liberal. Look at his history. He was always a liberal. But nonetheless, why is his commentary elsewhere kind of weak? It's because where he lives. I think that's one of the main factors. So I think the location and coming from Canada is a huge impact. Not only is it an explanation of why he's not a believer, because, Canada is a spiritually dead country. There are good churches in Canada, but, let's not. If you're a believer in Canada, you might be having a hard time finding a church that's within 2 hours.
well, that's why I kind of one of the last edits I put in was the four of the biggest social political issues in the past several years, that being COVID, global populism, which would include Donald Trump, Me Too, and global warming, which I know Me Too might not be like super social political, but as a cultural issue, it certainly
It
is
still is in the
impactful.
Southern Baptist Convention.
Still is. And it's just like, okay, on three of the four, he kind of was on the wrong side of. Like, he kind of fell for the COVID narrative and, got jabbed, and kind of was thinking that if you just went along with the system, that the mandates would go away, or that he was slow to realize that the mandates were not about public health, which again, someone like him that like he has the educational background of like, talk about the Nazis and communism and all that, but just like you couldn't see these elements in play with your own eyes. It's kind of like the scene in Good Will Hunting where, you know, what's his face confronts um, Matt Damon's character, saying I'm sure you could describe the Sistine Chapel, but you couldn't tell me what it's like to actually be inside of it. And that's kind of like, you can describe, the abstract of communism, but you couldn't tell me what it's like to actually live in it. You couldn't tell me what it's like when the government starts imposing it, because you didn't recognize it when you saw it. So that was kind of the big thing on that. Of course, pushing the jabs.
I mean, Glenn Beck's the same way, and I would say that Glenn Beck is right wing and conservative even, because Glenn Beck was the same way. He wrote an entire thriller novel about the government creating an emergency in order to take away liberty. He wrote an entire book called The Overton Window, which is a fiction about that entire concept, and then he fell hard for COVID. So you're right that a lot of these people, they don't have the worldview, and that kind of goes back to the original question of Christ or chaos. The believers with the worldview are the ones that are the Christians with a worldview are a much better cultural influence, because they won't just be good on one issue. They can put issues together because they have a worldview founded and centered in the Bible that'll allow them to put issues together. Not just one issue that they're really good on. Like James Lindsay is really good on critical race theory, but he's really bad on a lot of other issues. For instance,
just like the second issue is like the populism, like, and that would be like Resurrection. Oh, like I bring up a channel called Resurrection Europe, which kind of did like a more of a deep dive into like how he's kind of like a globalist, and how he critiques certain like ethno nationalism, like and again, I'm not going to say I'm well versed in European politics, but obviously there's a huge sentiment in Europe that like immigration has diluted them or replaced them, because the whole replacement theory is a reality over there, and their political process is more or less broken to where they can't reform. You cannot reform European politics from within anymore, because they've essentially diluted their politics, or they've diluted their electorate to where the bureaucrats have all the power. The parliamentary system ignores the will of the people because they don't need to listen to them. And that's how you have votes like Brexit that take hold, is because the partisan system doesn't listen to the people.
Right. And goes back to what we said earlier in the video. They don't have a political apparatus, a right-wing political apparatus in the country. I mean, UKIP, when that was a thing, they had like a handful of percentage points in the UK Parliament. I don't even know if UKIP is still a thing. But Nigel Farage does do a tour in the United States. I feel like he's in the United States more than he is in the UK, in terms of just advancing himself or whatever, advancing the cause. So
like the third issue was the Kavanaugh issue, and again, this one I kind of say, even though this one happens before COVID, obviously, because it's 2018, but it is kind of like, okay, does he have a tendency to kind of fall for narratives? Because it looks like, I mean, I got the impression that he kind of believed the Christine Blasey Ford scenario, I guess the claim, and that's why he's just like, even if he is, he actually said at the time, even if he's confirmed, he should resign, because. And again, that's where I kind of say, okay,
so the country can move on.
Yeah, so the country can move on, or so that the left won't go bonkers, because giving them what they want won't make them go bonkers. And it's not like they haven't tried to sack, Clarence Thomas. They did the whole Borking thing. I mean, again, when they try to go after these Supreme Court justices, I mean, they can make some headway.
Roy Moore got Me Too down in Alabama. I mean, what evidence has surfaced since that he actually did the things that was alleged?
I mean, it's pretty much disappeared at this point. But I mean, and he kind of seems to suggest that Kavanaugh must have done something wrong. Again, it's kind of like I wrote that he was trying to play like the adult in the room, and it kind of backfired. Instead of like revealing wisdom, it kind of reveals,
because he got ratioed on that, right?
Yeah. Like Ben Shapiro came out on him. And that's like the most un-Ben Shapiro-like thing ever.
Now, Ben Shapiro will occasionally disagree with pundits as it relates to things like red flag laws, which he was on the wrong side of, by the way. And I don't know whether he's really... Again, I don't follow Ben Shapiro at all. He was incredibly weak on COVID. And by weak, I mean counterproductive.
Yeah.
So anything else to bring up as it relates to Jordan Peterson? Because I think,
I mean, I did say he was a climate skeptic, so there's some positive.
okay, so that's a pot. So
And
you
that's
said
the 3 of the 4. That was
so.
that was probably the one, but I don't know if again, that was something that, that was Joe Rogan this year, so that might, I don't know if that's a new position versus a long-standing one.
Legacy position, yes. So Joe Rogan is one of the last figures I want to talk about. And is Joe Rogan on the same level as the other names we brought up, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, Elon Musk?
I mean,
And I
I
would
might put
I
him
want to
more
fall
toward,
back and say that Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, and Dave Rubin, along with Ben Shapiro, the only right winger, and I'll say Ben Shapiro is right wing for because he is right wing. Like I don't think he's he's not left wing, but
neocon.
right. These 4 names were all listed on the original intellectual dark web. And if you're subscribed to Evangelical Dark Web and you don't know why we're called Evangelical Dark Web, it is a play on intellectual dark web, because at the time in like 2019, there was this big Eva type at Mere Orthodoxy, which is a website that is not merely orthodox. And they talked about the evangelical dark web in a negative light, kind of like as a threat to like national security. So I've kind of co-opted the name and to use in our favor. So that's a little history lesson on the evangelical dark web, but intellectual dark web is what that's a play on. And Rubin, Peterson, Rogan, and Shapiro are all on that list. We're all on the short list of the intellectual dark web in that infamous New York Times article. So is Joe Rogan on the same level as the other 3 names that are in the headline of this stream?
I mean, I feel like he's not just, I mean, his rise was probably earlier than all those 4, than his other counterparts, because Joe Rogan, I mean, he was big in the I mean, he did like Fear Factor, like he made his bones by doing a lot of the uncomfortable stuff. He was like the Ryan Seacrest, except more down and dirty, doing the
Right. And
UFC instead of
yes,
American
and
Idol.
talking about UFC, Joe Rogan invested in UFC. He or not money, but in terms of time and bringing legitimacy to it, he was doing like reporting on it back when they were doing fights on Indian reservations. Like Joe Rogan put some sweat equity to get where he's at when
I
it
mean, in a
comes to the
sense,
UFC.
as the mob would say, he
He
made
took
his
risk.
bones.
Right. He made his bones. He took risk to get to where he's at on the UFC front. And where he's at on the UFC front, it has a large degree of where large is a large factor in why his podcast is as successful as it is. Because what does his podcast start off talking about? A lot of UFC, a lot of stoner stuff. But
I also don't think
who are his most frequent? What is the most frequent category of guests on the Joe Rogan Experience? UFC fighter.
I also don't think he is viewed as the philosopher type, though. I mean, he's like the guy that has all the philosophers on, or
Right.
all the people. He brings the guest on, and again, he made his career because he went places, not because he sat
Places
back.
went to him.
Yeah.
And I think that would juxtapose him with Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin, I guess he was a comedian back in the day that transferred into doing talk radio. That's not as much skin in the game in terms of, because Joe Rogan did comedy as well and still does stand up. But again, he invested heavily into reporting on UFC, and he took roles like Fear Factor, I guess. But the UFC thing has a lot more to do with the success of his podcast than Fear Factor, and I don't think most people realize that. But even his own comedy, the UFC thing is why he is at where he's at. So I think most people don't realize that. And I don't think I would agree that he's not on the same level as the other 3 names, because I think Joe Rogan is a genuine truth seeker. But I don't think Joe Rogan wants to be clickbaited, or I don't think he strives to be clickbaited as much as he is clickbaited. Like Elon Musk loves the attention that he gets from posting memes. I don't blame him. I like posting memes as well. But Elon Musk kind of lives for the thrill. That's why, what did we talk about opening up? Is he about owning Twitter? Is he about owning Twitter? So Joe Rogan, I don't see being about that. He's kind of just doing his own thing. Like he didn't flex that much capital when it came to Spotify employees trying to like oust him. He didn't flex that much muscle over it.
Well, I said with Rogan is that Rogan, like people will stop going to Rogan if Rogan stops going places. Like, I mean, like obviously he's kind of he's bent his knees a little bit. He's done a curtsy to Spotify and the woke this year. So, I mean, you haven't really heard much about Rogan as much this year as you would have this time last year. So, I mean, he did bend the knee.
I mean, he gets clickbaited by conservative media a lot. But so do the other names that we just mentioned. Elon Musk probably being the most prevalent. But I don't think Joe Rogan is not writing books spouting conservative talking points from 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. He's not doing that. Dave Rubin is. And he's not writing self-help books as far as I know. And then, of course, he's not, I don't know what he's doing entrepreneurially. I'm sure Joe Rogan has an investment portfolio of businesses, but I wouldn't know. I'd be surprised if he didn't. And some of those businesses might be smoking some weed. So, comment by Brycor. Jordan Peterson is a danger to the spiritual welfare of conservatives. Depravity is seeping into all aspects of our society, our home life, our churches, our government, and it goes on and on. And I think that's one of the reasons why you felt compelled to write this, because I didn't tell you to write about Jordan Peterson. But you felt compelled to write about this. And
I mean, kind of was just like, okay, this is like one of the bigger, I guess, grifters on the right as far as like this guy's being platformed. He doesn't really believe this in conservatism as far as like the gay thing, the pronoun thing. Again, a little on the more globalist side. So again, he doesn't. It's like we're platforming people that don't actually believe in the ideology we're trying to advance.
Right, but we do want to we want to win one little Twitter argument for a day.
Exactly.
And that's what.
But I will actually, address the spiritual part because that's what I do in the article. Because he has done lectures on like the Bible stories, and to him, like the Bible is just very it's just mythos, and they're like, and I kind of describe him as very anti-Christological. And not in the sense that he's the Antichrist, but in the idea that he presents a very formidable counterfeit to like Christianity. You can believe that it's the bedrock of civilization. You can believe that there's foundational truths, but don't worry about the whole sin part, the whole you need redemption part. And I used the Christian Post's summary on his Cain and Abel teaching, where where basically he says that, I guess the quote is, God punished Cain for improper sacrifices that were, in quote, not in service to the highest good. So, again,
you said he tried to split the baby on the interpretation.
No, splitting the baby on that is kind of normal because whether you believe the contents of the sacrifice of Cain's sacrifice matter or not, again, that's up in the air. And I said that pastors might go one of two ways. They might say that Cain was lazy in his sacrifice, or that his sacrifice did not meet the qualifications that he should have known, or they might say that it was all a heart thing. Cain had pride.
I mean, that would be my position, that because you don't go from zero to murdering your brother.
So the question is whether
that would be my position, is he didn't have a saved, regenerate heart.
But if it was entirely a heart issue, then the contents of the sacrifice don't matter. But you've seen pastors kind of go back and say he gave some of the first fruits, which I'm sure the text is just he gave of the first fruits. But I mean, that's where you get into like, oh, NIV says this, King James says this. So, like, do the contents of the sacrifice matter? And again, that's where the pastors will veer. He goes down the center and plays at middle ground, which I guess is typical.
But the archetype that he uses is not typical.
No, but I mean, I imagine you would get that at like a lot of prosperity churches that, he was
I
not
think
in
you get
service
that
to
at
the
a lot
highest
of
good.
liberal churches
Yes.
that would talk about that.
Because again,
prosperity churches would talk about how you need to bless and give so that you receive. That's
but
more of a
highest good
prosperity
could
thing.
just be replaced with greater good.
So how often does he weigh into the Bible?
I mean, I think he just has Genesis, but I mean, he does it with like the Disney fairy tales, like, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast. So, I mean, it's kind of treated like that. But the Cain and Abel one kind of struck out to me because it's just like you're kind of putting a very, I guess you could say, socialist slant, a very collectivist slant to the story. Because again, if God's just a archetype for society in Cain and Abel, then you are left with socialism. You are left with he was holding back from the group and being selfish. He was
And
trying to get one over on the
let me
group
just
by not
remind the
contributing.
chat to submit your questions now, since we're going to be wrapping up soon. If you have any questions for us. And just so he doesn't weigh on the Bible as frequently, what do you think about his daughter supposedly being a Christian? I say supposedly because I haven't verified I haven't looked into her faith at all. And I do not just accept random celebrity professions of faith. I just don't. It doesn't matter whether you're her or Kanye West. I kind of wonder, and she's used, I want to say, a newfound faith or any sort of faith to kind of create her own level platform. I believe his daughter's name is Michaela.
Yeah. I mean,
have you looked into that at all?
I haven't. I mean, again, like, I mean, I'm sure Christian Post has something like a fluff piece on her, but I mean, I
I'm
guess
sure they
if
do.
she said something controversial or like a hot take, I haven't heard it. But a lot of celebrities claim they're Christian. Then you get the Chris Pratt types that they want to.
He's not religious.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not what you said in the past.
So, yeah, I mean, $1 for every time I saw someone say religion, not relationship, not religion. Then
right. Let's take the good stuff Sam Harris takes. Sam Harris also part of the so-called intellectual dark web, by the way. So, well, anyway, I think we've kind of touched up on a lot of what we set out to talk about. Let me just put my own ticker, kind of like supporting the Evangelical Dark Web at evangelicaldarkweb.com/join. And that's where you can support our Patreon-like system, because this video is not going to be monetized after this stream. That's for sure.
which word was it?
It's usually yes, that word will do it every single time. If you talk about abortion, it's literally in their monetization things. That'll demonetize a video real quick. But anyway, Evangelical Dark Web is trying to be the future of Christian news, in that we're not going to advance a celebrity culture of Christendom like you see at Christian Post. And we're not going to be liberal CNN news gatherers like you see at Christianity Today or RNS, Religious News Service. So there has to be discernment in Christian news gathering, and that's what we're trying to bring to the table. And it's the bottom level, but there's room for growth, a lot of room for growth, and we're going to do that and take on the Christian media industry. So that's what we're trying to do. Thank you very much for the kind comments, Brightcore and Sharon B. Other than that, you want to plug anything at the moment?
No. I mean, obviously, there's other works I've done on, like, when we did like the.
I mean, I got your socials at the in the description. So
there's probably an upcoming stream on Base Manifesto, or
probably
we still haven't done JFK yet.
No, we haven't talked JFK. I'm not sure if
Sorry,
we'll be
RFK.
able to RFK. I'm not sure if we'll be able to talk about RFK on YouTube. I'm a little worried about doing a stream on that.
Use all the code words.
I don't. Is there enough code words?
That'll be about the AIDS.
Oh yes, AIDS. Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Steve Smith. Awesome. So anyway, it's getting late, but have a great night. Have a blessed night, and we will catch you on the next one.